Warhammer 40k Dawn of War 4 has just done something no video game has ever done before. It's giving us a playable Primarch. In all the years of Warhammer 40k games, from the original Dawn of War trilogy to Space Marine and beyond, the Primarchs have always been distant legends, background characters, or overpowered NPCs. But in Dawn of War 4, Jan Theysen of the Dark Angels will actually be playable in the campaign. We are going to break down exactly what that means. We'll talk about what a Primarch actually is in Warhammer 40k lore, go through the Dawn of War 4 trailer and its context, which is actually very important, and then do a full breakdown of the big IGN interview with director Jan Theysen to understand how this all fits in to the game's story, gameplay, and even 40k canon. And finally, we'll end with some talking points and questions for you to weigh in on. So sit down and relax, but also brace yourself for some really in-depth talk about Dawn of War 4. Let's start with the basics. What is a Primarch and why is it such a big deal? Well, in Warhammer 40k lore, the Primarchs are genetically engineered super warriors created by the Emperor himself. Each Primarch was designed to lead one of the original Space Marine legions and to embody a specific trait or way of war. Some are tactical masterminds, others are brutal close combat monsters, others are masters of stealth. They are not just strong Space Marines, they are on a completely different level. Superhuman strength, speed, intelligence, resilience, and presence. A Primarch can sway entire battles by simply existing on the field. They are legends whose names shape the history of the galaxy. We've seen them in games before. Rubute Guilliman of the Ultramarines has appeared. Mortarion, Daemon Primarch of the Death Guard, has shown up, but they've always been NPCs or background elements. You've never been the one clicking on a Primarch and commanding him yourself. Dawn of War 4 is the first time that this changes. Jan Theysen, the Primarch of the Dark Angels, will be playable in one of the final missions of the Space Marine campaign. And that alone is a huge step in how far Games Workshop is now willing to go with their most powerful characters in video games. Now let's talk about the story setup and the trailer. The game returns us to the war-torn world of Kronus, a planet that veterans of Dawn of War Dark Crusade will of course recognize. The trailer opens with the Blood Ravens, led by Captain Cyrus and Chief Librarian Jonah Orion, arriving in orbit over Kronus at the start of the game. They get into an intense space battle with war boss Gorguts and his orcs, which eventually forces both sides planet-side. Down on Kronus, things are already a mess. Orc forces under a second commander, Guzkata, are causing chaos. Meanwhile, elsewhere on the planet, techno-archaeologist Potentia Delta 9 is exploring Kronus for lost knowledge. Just as the Necron Chronomancer Thothmek initiates a full Necron invasion, awakening the dormant tombs beneath the surface. So you've got orcs, Necrons, and a beleaguered Imperium force all colliding on this one world. The Imperium's lines are failing. Their last stand is collapsing. It's very much that classic 40k vibe. Hopeless last stand, overwhelming Xenos threat, and a sense that humanity is about to be crushed. And then, at the crucial moment, things change. The Dark Angels arrive. The Dark Angels come in as a second chapter of Space Marines, moving to support the Blood Ravens. At the end of the trailer, we get a brief, tantalizing shot of Jan Theysen himself, helmet on, stepping into the frame. It's only a glimpse, but it confirms two huge things. First, the Dark Angels are fully present as a playable faction, and second, the Lion is physically on the battlefield. The Dark Angels are confirmed as one of two Space Marine factions in the game, fully playable in all game modes. During the Space Marine campaign, you'll control both Blood Ravens and Dark Angels, choosing which missions you want to play from each chapter's perspective. The Dark Angels have their own campaign commanders, Company Master Astoran and Chaplain Ezrael. They've got their own identity and history, and while they share core Space Marine war gear and tactics, they have a distinct playstyle and flavour. Where the Blood Ravens are often involved in smaller, more tactical, sometimes stealthy operations, the Dark Angels bring overwhelming force to the biggest, most brutal battlefields. Precision strikes versus all-out war. And as the campaign's story reaches its breaking point, Lion L. Jonson himself descends onto the battlefield, giving players that historic first chance to wield the might of a Primarch in an RTS mission. With all that said, now let's break down the IGN interview with director Jan Theysen and merge the questions and answers into a clear picture of what Dawn of War 4 is actually doing. First, why the Dark Angels? Well, according to Theysen, it started with the obvious. You can't have a Dawn of War game without the Blood Ravens. But as they discussed other factions, Games Workshop themselves suggested that Dawn of War 4 didn't have to be Blood Ravens only. They floated the idea of adding another chapter, and specifically suggested the Dark Angels as a cool fit. From there, the conversation naturally escalated to, do you want Lion L. Jonson? And the team, of course, said yes. So the Dark Angels weren't just some random pick, they were a collaboration with Games Workshop, who actively pushed the idea that Dawn of War could feature multiple Space Marine chapters side by side. The campaign structure reflects that. Dawn of War 4 has 4 different campaigns overall. For each campaign, the developers wanted to offer players some meaningful choices. In the Orc campaign, for example, you can choose between different Orc factions who are actually fighting each other. For the Space Marines, that doesn't make sense in the same way. Blood Ravens and Dark Angels aren't enemies, they are working towards the same goal. So instead, the choice is about perspective and playstyle. Both chapters are acting simultaneously across the wider campaign, and you pick who you want to follow for particular operations. Sometimes they are in the same place at the same time, and you might get missions from both angles. Other times, events will branch. The Dark Angels head into a gigantic frontline engagement, while the Blood Ravens infiltrate behind enemy lines. Story-wise, both things happen, but you decide which side you actively play. The overall story outcome doesn't change, but your experience of it does, depending of course whose boots you're in. The Blood Ravens are depicted as more resource limited, forced into smaller, more infantry-focused missions with some stealthy or covert elements. The Dark Angels, by contrast, are the hammer. Lots of firepower, large-scale battles, and big all-out war set pieces. In multiplayer though, things are different. Both chapters share the same core Space Marines roster. The real difference comes from their heroes and commanders, rather than entirely different unit lists. So if you pick Blood Ravens in multiplayer, you still get all the toys, even if the campaign portrays them as more constrained. Now let's zoom in into the big topic, the Lion himself. The Primarchs are some of the most debated characters in 40k. Fans love, of course, arguing about who would beat whom in a fight and how powerful they really are. Translating a Primarch into a playable RTS unit is incredibly tricky because they are so far beyond normal units in every way. Jan Theysen explains that when they first floated the idea to Games Workshop, it wasn't met with resistance so much as caution. Games Workshop essentially said, maybe tell us what you want to do with him and then we'll decide. The problem is obvious. You can't just drop a Primarch into the regular game as a standard hero. He would of course totally annihilate balance. You can't make him a regular multiplayer option or a unit that you can summon at will because his power level simply doesn't fit the framework. So the solution they came up with was to treat the Lion as a tightly controlled guest appearance. In Dawn of War 4, the Lion appears in 2 cutscenes and 1 mission where you actually get to play as him. That's it, he's an event, not a permanent tool. In the story, the Blood Ravens and Dark Angels throw everything they have at a crisis they simply can't overcome. At the very end, when it looks like all is lost, the Lion arrives. That's his big entrance, and that's when you get to take control of him and unleash the full spectacle of a Primarch on the battlefield. Crucially, Theysen makes it clear this sequence is designed to be fun and cinematic, not balanced. They weren't trying to make a fair multiplayer-ready version of Lionel Johnson, they wanted to give players a taste of what it feels like to wield that level of power, without worrying about whether it actually fits neatly into the meta. If the Lion ever appeared in any other game mode, he says, he couldn't be the same unit as he is in that campaign mission. The Primarch experience you get there is deliberately over the top, and that's part of the appeal. Now, one big topic in the interview is whether they should have kept the Lion's inclusion a secret. The developers clearly thought about it. On one hand, revealing a playable Primarch for the first time in 40k video game history could have been an unforgettable late-game twist. Imagine playing through the whole campaign, watching your forces crumble, and then suddenly, a Primarch drops out of nowhere. But the team ultimately decided that in the modern internet landscape, that kind of secret just doesn't survive. As Theysen says, it would take minutes after launch for a screenshot or TikTok clip to spoil it. The same goes for the Dark Angels as a whole. Hiding their entire presence would be, well, nearly impossible. In fact, they kind of actually teased it themselves when fans noticed a file name related to the Lion in a video. That wasn't even intentional, they just didn't check the file name before posting. So instead of risking a tiny portion of players getting a perfect surprise, while everyone else is spoiled anyway, they chose to use the Lion and the Dark Angels up front as a major part of the game's reveal and marketing push. It is of course a trade-off, less shock in the moment, but more excitement and hype leading up to launch. Another big topic is Canon. We know Space Marine 2 is confirmed canon in 40k setting, with Titus playing a major role in the ongoing narrative. Where does Dawn of War sit in comparison? Well, Theysen says that they know exactly where the game takes place in terms of time and location, and that it fits into the wider 40k universe. Kronus itself was chosen because it's a familiar name from the Dark Crusade, and they wanted to explore what happened to the planet and its story after that. They even dug into the question of where Kronus lies relative to the Great Rift, ultimately placing it in the Imperium Nihilus on the far side of the galaxy. The story has consequences. It helps explain why the Blood Ravens are in such a rough position, scattered and struggling, and why the Dark Angels and the Lion himself can be present there at this point in the timeline. But whether or not Dawn of War 4 is officially canon is ultimately a Games Workshop call. Theysen doesn't confirm an official yes. For now, we should probably view it as a lore-aligned, coherent story that could be canon, but isn't formally declared to be in the same way as something like Space Marines 2. As for fan theories about the relationship between the Dark Angels and Blood Ravens, especially around successor chapters or deeper ties, Theysen downplays that. Yes, both chapters are canon, and yes, they share the stage here, but it's not meant to be some massive redefinition of their relationship. They don't fully trust each other, and they're not heading toward a buddy cop spin-off. The focus is on the immediate threat on Kronus, not rewriting chapter history or getting heavily into things like the Fallen in this particular story. Now, one really interesting angle that this all raises is how Dawn of War 4 might handle future DLCs. Right now, the game will start with 4 base factions and includes the Dark Angels as a variant chapter under the wider Space Marine umbrella. This is similar in spirit to what games like Age of Empires 4 has done, adding variant civilizations built off the base civilizations instead of always expanding with entirely new, fully separate factions. That approach opens up a lot of possibilities. Rather than spending years making a whole new race from scratch every time, you can build deep, flavorful sub-factions from the existing frameworks, other Space Marine chapters, or subgroups from within the orcs. Dawn of War 4 is already leading into that idea with the difference between Blood Ravens and Dark Angels in the campaign. They share core units, but differ in commanders, mission structure, and identity. That could easily be a template for a future DLC, not always brand new races, but rich, highly themed sub-factions that plug into the same broad faction lists. However, for me, I'm not a big fan. I would much rather have a slow and steady build-up with a brand new race like the Chaos, Eldar, you name it. I'd love to see brand new factions. The question is, however, as players, do we prefer full, completely new factions like Eldar, Tau, or Tyranids? Or are we open to sub-factions and variants that rework and deepen the existing 4 factions? Now, one natural worry when people hear Dark Angels and Primarch in the same sentence is multiplayer balance. Surely, if the Dark Angels have the Lion, they'll become the default or favoured pick. Well, the good news is, the Lion isn't a multiplayer unit. He's restricted to that cinematic campaign mission and a couple of cutscenes. He's not a commander that you can pick in skirmish or ranked. You don't tech up to him, you don't rush him, and you don't have to design your build order around countering him. The developers explicitly state that the version of the Lion you play in the campaign is not designed with balance in mind. It's a power fantasy moment, not a competitive element. So while his presence makes the Dark Angels feel extra special in the story, it doesn't break the multiplayer meta. So that's Dawn of War 4's biggest reveal so far, a return to Kronus, a dual-chapter Space Marine campaign with Blood Ravens and Dark Angels, and for the first time ever, a fully playable Primarch in the form of Lion L. Jonson in a late-game mission. Now, I did want to throw out some questions to hear what you guys thought. We talked about it earlier in the video, but how do you feel about the reveal of Lion L. Jonson? Would you have loved it to have been a secret so that you could find out with a spectacular moment in the campaign playthrough? Or do you agree with the developers that the secret really wouldn't have stayed a secret for very long, and so they might as well have capitalized on it with the marketing push? With future content, what would you rather see from Dawn of War 4? Fully fledged new factions with completely unique units, or sub-factions and variant chapters built off the 4 main factions? Similar to the way that Age of Empires 4 has done with variant civilizations. If you enjoyed this breakdown and want more Dawn of War 4 content, don't forget to subscribe. More importantly, the very most important thing you could do is hit the notification bell so that you get a bit of a ding-dong when I next upload a video. Speaking of which, the end card on your screen right now, well, YouTube believes that this is the next best video you'd like to watch. Either way, as always, take care and see you next time.